Hey, everybody. I'm Dave Lundahl. I'm the CEO for Insights Now, and welcome to this webinar today. This webinar, I'm really excited about the conversation we're going to have today. It's regarding really a key topic, and that is being climate smart through your product strategies. And we have an exciting representative from a company called Neutral Foods, which I'll get into by way of introduction here in a second. But before I do that, I want to just take care of some housekeeping. So at the end of our exchange today, we're going to have a Q&A session. And so it'll be an opportunity for each of you to ask questions and have them answered. So to do that, just post your questions in this chat box, and then we'll take care of those at the end and ask them to our people that are involved for answering. So so more and more consumers are feeling tensions in their lives about climate change, and are seeking ways to take personal action to do something about it. Now, research that Insights Now is conducted, and we presented some of this research in past webinars, shows that about half of primary shoppers in the US are aspirational to buy more sustainable products, but only about 15% actually do. And they do not buy because either they can't find the product is they're confused about what is sustainable, or they're concerned about the product performance, maybe that it's not going to taste good, or it's not going to be convenient. And last, they're concerned about the affordability, because some more climate smart products are a little bit more expensive than others. Not always, but sometimes they are, and that becomes a barrier for people. So a term that we've been hearing more and more in the industry of late is called climate smart. And having a strategy for how you pivot in the face of change is what climate smart is all about. One of the biggest drivers of change in our lifetime, I believe, and I think all of us on this one will agree here, that is climate change. It impacts so many things. It impacts agriculture, which impacts the supply chains that food companies use in producing and manufacturing products, impacts not only the manufacturing process itself, such as needing to utilize less water or less energy because of scarcity of those sort of resources, or the cost increases in those resources. It impacts employees for our companies. And last, it impacts consumers. Impacts the product innovation, therefore, and it impacts so many things about how we bring products to markets. It impacts consumers because they feel tensions, and tensions are really what we want to have products to resolve. And the products that are going to be successful in the future, the ones that are truly climate smart, the ones that resolve these tensions. Now, in the May issue of Food Technology, there were a number of companies highlighted an article about, it was titled, "Can Food Brands Help Reverse Climate Change?" Okay. And these are some of the different companies that were highlighted in that article. Now, one of these companies, we have today a product leader from a company called Neutral Foods, Jim Jarman. Thank you for joining us today. He's the Vice President of Product and Marketing for Neutral Foods. We also have with us Brian Brisky. Brian, welcome today. Brian is a product strategist. He's on the Insights Now team, and he helps clients develop and activate their product strategies through the consumer and market insights that we generate. So Brian is going to lead with some questions from a kind of a product strategist point of view, and to Jim, and we'll learn a lot more about what Neutral Foods is doing to creating impact for a more sustainable future. So welcome, Jim. Take it away, Brian.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dave. Hey, Jim, so coming from all the product leaders and marketing leaders out there, we're all very excited, and we got to start at the very beginning. So the genesis of this whole thing starts with a product vision. Can you walk us through, like, how was this incepted? How did this come about originally?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks, Brian, Dave, and team for having us on. We obviously love talking about the work we're doing here and the work we do to support farmers and consumers. So appreciate the chance to talk about it. The reality that we're facing at the beginning of the company and in today as well is that our global food system is one of the biggest sources of greenhouse gas emissions on our planet, which is a big challenge. But it also gives us a real opportunity to make big improvements. So Neutral was founded on the belief that consumers can make a difference through our everyday choices. So we started with food because if you buy an electric car or put solar panels on your house, those are one-time decisions. They're often financially out of reach for some folks. But every single one of us, we consume food every day. So our idea was to start with food, and we started with dairy because dairy is in 93% of Americans' refrigerators today. And a lot of people already understand that there's a connection between cows and methane and cows and emissions. And so if we can make a big impact on that process, we can have a gigantic impact across the industry. So for us, the focus on the types of products that have the highest amount of carbon intensity, as well as the highest amount of total carbon, that's where we participate. So dairy and beef are top of that list. And if you can make an impact there, you can make significant changes, not just for us, but for the industry. So we focus on staple categories like milk, like ground beef. We always joke that we're not going to make the first carbon neutral blue cheese, not because it wouldn't be delicious, but because there's not enough blue cheese purchased to make a significant difference in total emissions. But there is milk. And so we have to make sure that we're making a difference in what we do. So that's where we focus on dairy, we focus on milk.
So that's really good, because I'm thinking how, people, when they begin with a vision, there's like, what's the obvious sore? What's the major eyesore? And I could say for anybody who's driven through a heartland of America, you can smell the cows. That is a sore reminder that there's some improvements to be made to our food system. So once you kind of had that vision in place and you looked at that as a target to go after, how did you build about your consumer understanding? Did you begin with some kinds of segmentation ideas and then work from there? What was your kind of starting phases and next steps that followed from that?
Absolutely. Well, the reality for us, and this is better because it keeps improving every single year, but the reality is that 5 out of 6 consumers in the US already understand that climate change is real and that it's impacted by human activity. And 50% of consumers are willing to make choices, things like changing brands, sometimes paying more for products to choose brands that align with their values. And so with so many consumers already understanding that climate change is a real challenge and understanding that they want to be part of the solution, we want to be an easy fit for them. So we give consumers the opportunity every single day through their food choices to make a positive difference in the climate challenges that we're facing. So since day one of our company founding, our mission has been to radically reduce the carbon footprint and the emissions that come from the agriculture sector, and to empower consumers to be a positive part of that change. So we empower consumers, and we also empower farmers, because farmers are absolutely key to this challenge. We don't solve this problem without bringing farmers along for the ride. And good farmers are some of the original stewards of the land. So when we can work with great farmers and help them be even better, we can bring this product that consumers are asking for and that consumers have indicated they wanted, but maybe they didn't know was an option. They didn't know that it existed, because until Neutral existed, this wasn't an option for people. So we have to make sure that consumers understand that we exist. One of the biggest challenges, honestly, for us still is that as a new brand, not enough people know that we exist. Because once they find out that we exist and they find out where to get us, we pick up loyal consumers. So it's really about making sure that we understand that consumer need at the end of the day, and that we bring them something that they're looking for.
Wow. Okay, so I heard several different product leadership concepts in there. I heard, the consumers vote with their dollars. I heard the underserved market. I heard the importance of product market fit. And what I sense coming out of this is a lot of product-led organization. That's becoming a stronger word in product management circles lately, that a business really, instead of coming from this tops down kind of corporate strategy initiative of just throwing ESG on people's plates, it seems like, your team, you started with the product itself, looking at what the unmet need was and building outward from there. So I'm curious how you went about, developing your first, product entry that you'd like to launch into market, and then kind of how that has evolved to look at other kinds of market entries you're looking at in the near future.
Yeah. Well, so again, once we decided food is the entry point for us, milk became a really obvious answer because of the connection to cows. And so given that, that real dairy milk is in 93% of refrigerators, that was an easy starting point. So we started with that product, and it was launched in the Pacific Northwest. New Seasons, our first customer. We've been like big fans of these guys since the beginning. They bet on us early, and they're part of the reason that we exist today. So New Seasons up in Portland in the Pacific Northwest was our starting point. We went from 35 stores to over 2,000 stores in a span of about 18 months. So we've been growing like crazy, which is great. But we really have to understand what is the consumer demand for these things in order to make sure we're putting the right things in front of them. I think you're right in talking about the product-led piece, but at the end of the day, that really comes back to what are consumers asking for. So we're not here to try and convince consumers that they have to change everything about the delicious, wholesome, nutritious dairy that they love. We're here to say there's a better way to get that nutrition and that deliciousness that you're looking for, and you can do it in a carbon neutral way. And so understanding that, like I said, 93% of consumers are buying real dairy today. Some people don't, and that's fine. We support that too. But for the 93% of people that are buying it, how do we give them the absolute best option for solving this problem? So then where does that extend to? So like I said, we look at, from a product perspective, what has the highest intensity of carbon and what has the highest total amount of carbon. So that's where you see us playing in dairy first, and then in beef secondarily. That will be our next entry point. We'll have the first ever USDA certified carbon neutral ground beef that'll hit the market this summer in our food service business. So where is the impact? The impact is in dairy, the impact is in beef. So that's where we play. So we lead with product, we lead with what consumers are looking for, and then we try to make sure that we support that business in the best way possible so that consumers can make educated and smart choices, because we think transparency is the key. When consumers have the information to make decisions that align with their values, they will do it, and they will show us that. So we have to be part of helping with that transparency and helping make sure people have an understanding of what those impacts are.
So I really got to point out some brilliance that I'm hearing from what you're saying there, because so many product managers struggle with trying to figure out, what is that one KPI? What is that North Star to drive all their thinking and their strategic, thinking from that? And it sounds like impact was the one that you and your team focused on and have since the very beginning. So I'm imagining, in any series of 2x2 matrices, when you're prioritizing any sort of project development or work, it's like, go back to the, what are we focused on? We're focused on impact. So now there's a second set of problems here though. And I want to give you the option of picking which way you want to go on this. So one, you're talking about the supply chain, the challenge of the scale, which I'm guessing you might have had either do some things there or keep with the status quo so you could hyperfixate on what you did want to change about the strategic combination of choices, which was at the consumer level. And at that second option is then, okay, at the consumer level, how are you dealing with the adoption? Because I'm thinking, imagine, crossing the chasm or an adoption curve. How are you knocking down those barriers to make it more either accessible or educate the masses? What has that been like? So which way do you want to go? You want to go into the adoption aspect of things? You want to go into the distribution channel sort of thing? What's more interesting for you right now?
Well, I think the adoption is always probably the biggest concern for us, because it has implications for channels as well. Again, I'd say the best bit of news for us is that we're not trying to convince people of something that they don't already want to do. We're not trying to ask people to give up something. We're not asking people that they have to make a life-altering decision. We're saying, move your hand 6 inches to the right or to the left on that grocery store shelf and grab the yellow carton. Grab the yellow carton instead of the red one, grab the yellow carton instead of whatever other carton you're choosing. And you take whatever your footprint was on that carton that you would have chosen to now 0. You have a 0 carbon footprint on the choice of that yellow carton when you pick it up and put it in your cart. So adoption is absolutely at the center of that. I mean, when they know we exist, we find consumers pick us up. But as a new brand, we didn't have gobs of money to throw at this. And so as we gained distribution partners, we leaned pretty heavily on them, and we did a lot of activity around specifically promotion in store at shelf. But we candidly have more work to do in just telling our story, So we launched our first ever marketing campaign on Earth Day of this year, and we're running that in select markets now. Again, we don't have gobs of money, so we have to be kind of just very intentional about where we put those things at what time. But where we put that campaign in place, and that campaign is called Milk for a Planet Worth Saving. Because what we wanted to do in recognizing this is to understand that telling people that the only way to move forward is to change everything, to give up everything they care about or that they enjoy is generally not all that motivating to consumers. Like some consumers are very, very motivated by that, but it's a very small percentage of folks. And it can sometimes make people become defensive. It can make people put their head in the sand. So we approach this in a different way. We approach this in a way to say, yes, there's a real challenge, but we can be part of the solution and you can too. So we wanted to celebrate all the interesting, quirky, funny, cute things about this planet that we love and remind people that that's why we're doing this. We're not doing this to scare people. We're not doing this to castigate people. We're doing this to say, as a collective, we can be part of the solution. And why do we care about this? So we talk about the planet we're saving because, I mean, candidly, this is where the best things are at. This is where all the grandmas are. This is where the cookies are. This is where the cute puppies are at. So we have to protect this place that we live. No offense to Elon and like populating Mars at some point in the future, but like this is where all the good stuff is at right now. So how do we protect this world that we all believe in and that we care about? And we've got tons and tons of data that tell us consumers care about protecting this place. So so the adoption is really the big question, and how do we get that message in front of more people? So we're continuing to roll that out, but where we are rolling it out, we see gains immediately. And so for us, it's probably a slow continual roll, but how can we continue to let more people know we exist? Because once they know we exist, they will choose us. They're looking for it already. And once they realize there's a solution that they can just grab that yellow carton, they're going to be in good shape. And then kind of tying that to the distribution question though, for us, it's about where do consumers expect to find you? So right now we have really strong distribution in the natural foods channel. You know, we're available at Whole Foods, at Sprouts, we're available at the Fresh Market, at Fresh Time. We're available also in some other mainstream grocers, like we're at Target all up and down the West Coast, but we primarily have focused on the natural channel because when consumers are looking for a product like this, that's where they tend to look first. You know, most consumers today are shopping at somewhere in the order of 3 grocery stores on a regular basis, but they don't shop every single category at every store. So if they're looking for a product that is really specifically geared around sustainability and geared around a claim of climate neutrality, they expect to see that in the natural channel first. And so that's where we really focus. We absolutely will cross that gap into more mainstream grocery as well. But right now we're really focused on how do we grow in the natural channel because that's where consumers tend to look for us anyway.
So it appears that what you've done is in sort of, where you can make your trade-offs. You've gone with sticking with the habits that are already in place and not trying to change the habits so much, but change the information available or the understanding that consumers have with regard to the existence even, or just, awareness. So I'm kind of wondering because someone out there is probably trying to imagine themselves as a consumer, they're a product manager trying to put themselves in the shoes of their consumer. And the challenge of that is reliance on your own lived experience, which is a limited set, right? So how did you go about informing your thinking? How did your team go about, collecting the insights to decide, okay, we're not going to focus on habits, we're going to focus on just information. And if we're going to do that, then, how did your decision tree kind of break out into choosing where you needed to apply the limited resources you did have to be able to be successful and effective?
Well, I mean, I'm going to admit on the front end, we're not getting everything right. I'm sure we're making mistakes on an everyday basis. So we're continuing to learn as well. But the main thing that we always turn to is what does the consumer tell us is important? So we really focus on what does consumer research look like in this space. And so we look at publicly available information, of course, but we also commissioned our own research. So we have multiple research projects that we have funded internally to look at how consumers are making these choices and what are the categories and the avenues that make the most sense for them. So, we don't want to assume that we know all the answers. Even where we think we've got a bunch of experts who are really smart and really passionate about these categories, doesn't mean we'll get it right all the time. So we have to listen to consumers first and foremost. So we commission that research and then we follow it. So when consumers talk about the categories that matter most and the kinds of messaging that matters most and what resonates for them, we want to make sure that we're listening. I think in general, it is a lot more effective to tap into what people are ready for than to try and convince them that they're wrong and they need to change their opinion. That doesn't mean that that people can't change their minds, of course, but that means if you come in telling people, let me tell you everything you're doing wrong and why you need to change it, generally people don't respond well to that. But when you have a consumer base, like I said, 5 out of 6 consumers that know that climate change is a challenge, and 50% of people that are willing to change brands to support those things that align with their vision and their values, we don't have to convince people that milk is delicious and nutritious and awesome. The people that are buying organic milk today, they just need to know there's an even better option for them to grab that yellow carton. So trying to convince consumers to change their beliefs is really hard. trying to help consumers with a belief that they already know that they want to address and they haven't found a way to address it yet, that's easier. So we want to be where consumers are at, and there's importance to all of those different avenues. There are people that will come and tell you that you have to change everything, and that is going to be really appealing and resonate for some folks. But we want to meet people where they are in large part and help them to make the best possible choice that they can that aligns with their values that they already have. We're not trying to change their values. We're trying to show them that there's a way that their values have a solution that exists already.
All right. So given you just said all that, I'm going to make it doubly difficult because, most product leaders are thinking they're obsessed with the consumer, consumer love and all that kind of stuff. But you actually have multiple stakeholders. And I need to talk about the other stakeholder group in the room that people are overlooking, because you didn't change the habits of the consumers. You informed them, but you have managed to change the habits of the farmers. And this is probably one of the most profound secrets that I think a lot of people don't realize is you dug all the way back to the origin of the supply chain and affected change there to bring that value all the way through. So we got to talk about the farmers. So walk us through how that was even possible. How did you manage to do that, where you went in and implemented the change to begin there?
Sure. Well, I think that I would always start when we talk about farmers by just affirming that our belief that farmers are the solution. We have we have scenarios occasionally where we'll meet a farmer that we're working with or that we're interested in working with, and they have skepticism. That happens regularly. Folks get, it's common for us to hear like, oh, I thought you guys were just a bunch of tech bros that wanted to come tell us how to run our farm. I will tell you from personal experience, the fastest way to get a boot on your ass and not get invited back to the farm is by telling the farmer, you know how to manage their farm better than they do. So we really, in a similar way to what we want to do with consumers, we want to figure out what are the farmers interested in doing that we can help that has the right kind of climate impact. So we have about a dozen types of interventions that we work on with farmers. There's 4 kind of key areas that lead to most of the emissions that happen at a farm level. Because if you look at the total footprint of a carton of milk, for us, 72% of that footprint comes from the farm and all the things that come up to the farm stage. The other 28% are the things that happen after: the transport to the bottling facility, the packaging, the transport to retailers, the refrigerators at the retailers, getting it home from the store to your refrigerator, recycling that carton at the end. That's the other 28%. But 72% come from farm and things that happen before the farm, the crop inputs, all of those kind of things. So if we know that's the place where the biggest impact happens, how do we help farmers to reduce that? So we don't do that by saying, let us tell you how to run your farm. We do that by saying, here's a set of solutions that have a climate impact. And oftentimes there are things that farmers have already been thinking about doing. Now, the one thing I always talk about with farmers is that everything we do has to have a co-benefit for the farmer that's above and beyond just the impact of carbon. Going to farmers and saying, we want you to take a new process or to change this, or to put in equipment or a process that's going to cost more money, cost more time, et cetera, with no change other than a carbon reduction, just generally not that successful. Not because the farmers don't care about it, but because the farmers, like everybody else, they're running a business. They're supporting their family on that farm. They have to make sure that what they're doing has the right kind of return for them. So telling them to take on cost and complexity for no benefit, generally not a winning solution. So when we can go to a farmer and say, hey, here's something you've probably already been thinking about doing, we can help by bringing money to the table, by bringing technical expertise to the table, by bringing project management to the table, by handling the measurement and verification side of this process. So we want to make it as easy as possible for farmers to say yes to those kind of transitions. But again, in many cases, it's something that they've already been thinking about doing. So if we can come and say, here's the type of things we can do, what's already on your list, and let's find the match, that's way more effective than coming and saying, you're doing it wrong, let us help you fix it. Because in many cases, we want to work with the farmers that are already doing the most things right. We're not looking to say who's the worst farmer out there and let's try and fix that problem. We're looking to say who are already doing things that really matter and let's help them. Let's bring them additional resources that they probably already want to do some of these things, but maybe haven't had access to that resource or haven't had access to that technical expertise. So we're here in the business of helping them be even more successful. We talk a lot about sustainability, and especially when you're talking with consumers, what that often means is environmental sustainability. Super important. That's core to our business, obviously. But when you talk to farmers, they look at this in 2 ways at the same time. They look at economic sustainability and environmental sustainability hand in hand. Their farm has to be successful economically, or else they won't be producing those outputs. So if you can help them do things that have an economic and an environmental push at the same time, it's a win-win for them and for us.
That's fantastic. So I'm hearing two separate, these groups of stakeholders, so stakeholder management across the board. You've got two sets of value propositions, two sets of benefits that you're trying to bring across through your supplier strategy to roll up into a product strategy, the go-to-market strategy, all these things coming together. So I'm wondering, as a way to kind of keep organized, there's both the data that you've been using to inform your decision-making, but also how you organize your decision-making. Are there any particular frameworks or ways that you and your team work around to try to be able to arrange and align all those things so they don't create any sort of dyssynergies or conflict later down the line?
I don't know if there's a specific framework that we would use. I think the thing that helps us is that those two sets of priorities are really, really aligned. We don't have very many scenarios where they are kind of pulling in opposite directions. And so that's something that really helps us to be effective, is knowing that what makes sense for the farmer in terms of reducing the carbon footprint and also getting these other economic co-benefits to them are the same things that enable us to take that message to the consumer to say, we've reduced that footprint and here's how. So we don't, I think, have a lot of places where they pull in different directions. I think the issue for us is probably more like not getting pulled in too many different directions ourselves. So how do we stay focused on the things that matter most and make sure that we're successful there? Our core product right now is our awesome organic milk that you can get in 2,000 outlets across the US. The next thing that's coming for us is going to be the carbon neutral beef that'll happen this summer for our food service business. We could do 20 new things potentially, but we have to make sure that we're doing them at a pace that makes sense so we can bring the supply chain along at the same time, bring our brand along to consumers in a way that makes sense. So it's probably trying not to do too many things at once. Like, how do we make sure we're focused on what matters most? Because if we're supporting those and making that carbon reduction, then we're bringing the right thing to consumers.
Absolutely. I mean, prioritization is key, especially when you have, constraints and limited resources and all sorts of competing factors. But it sounds like you've got some really great alignment now due to your focus. And so I'm kind of wondering then, when you, let's say, for example, you're going to get out there with the beef and everything, and you're starting to get more feedback from the market, how is that going to go in and maybe perhaps have some sort of pivoting required? Because there might be a little bit of tug of war between what you're trying to do on the supply side and what the market demand is. How do you reconcile the balance between those two to keep them continuously aligned?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a perfect solution, and anybody who thinks they get it right all the time is, I don't know, maybe slightly delusional. We certainly don't think that. We as part of a startup culture, we know that we have to be flexible. I mean, this is a thing we talk about very frequently. Finding the right opportunity to match what consumers are looking for with the demand, with the supply chain, all at the same time. It isn't always easy, so we've been working on this beef introduction, for example, for close to 2 years now. So we've been working on the farm projects, on the sourcing of this well ahead of when it can actually hit the market. So some of that is a bet. It's a bet long-term on what's going to matter and making sure that we are playing in the right place. But if it turns out that, instead of doing ground beef in a brick or in a bulk pack, that a patty is a better way to go, then we have to be able to kind of pivot and kind of react to what consumers are telling us. But at the end of the day, we know that we're betting on the right thing when we bet on beef and when we bet on dairy, because that's where the intensity is at, that's where the total carbon's at. And so we know we can have the biggest impact by playing there. But if we are thinking about what to do next, are we doing more in the world of butter? Do we pivot to cheese? Do we introduce yogurt? Those are all questions that will continue to evolve for us based on what consumers are telling us they're ready for. And then hopefully based on our own ability to manage the complexity of doing those things at the same time. Because we kind of want to do everything. We kind of want to do everything right away. I'm not the most patient person, but we also have to do it in a way that the market's ready for, the retailers are ready for, and that we can make sense. So yeah, so it's an ongoing, continuous process for us. We're always reevaluating it and thinking about like what comes next and where do we pivot.
So you've brought up one of the biggest banes of product management, or anybody who's trying to see around corners and over the horizon of time and technology, and it's that VUCA concept, right? That variability, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And so given that especially the supply chain with food and everything is really sensitive to global politics and whatever's happening overseas, that sort of thing, I'm wondering how do you bake in some flexibility or resilience into your product strategy? You mentioned pivots as one of the ways you might approach it, but let's say there's like a scratch off sticker or ticket, actually, like a lottery ticket. You're making some bets. How do you go about resolving the hidden information challenges to try to reduce the amount of uncertainty, to manage the risk? What are some of the approaches that you're using currently with regard to, I guess, using more consumer data, or is it research data? What are you using to help make that much more clear?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, we're using all of those sources. And then we also lean heavily on the expertise of our partners, right? And in many cases, that's our retail partners to say, like, what do you see coming? We're always excited when people recognize what we're doing and think it's cool, right? So we've been recognized in Whole Foods the trends report the last 2 years in a row. We were called out in Sprouts trend report this year. So it's great when retailers like what we're doing, but we also want to know from them, like, what else do you see? Where else should we be paying attention? So we have to make sure that we're kind of have our what I say to my kids all the time, turn your listening ears on, right? Like, how do we make sure that we're listening to the right sources of information, that we don't miss signals that could come through and point us in the right direction? So yeah, we use every one of those sources for sure, but we also have to, we have to some degree to listen to what we believe is important and where consumers are going to go next. So we know we're not always going to get that totally right, but we're going to keep listening. And every time we have an opportunity to learn a new thing, how do we put that into our process? Are we willing and flexible? Do we have any sort of sacred cows that we can't, that we aren't willing to flex on? I'd say very few of those. Really, at the end of the day, like, the sacred cows here are probably around things like carbon neutrality. Everything we do from day one has been carbon neutral. Everything we do will always be carbon neutral. That will not change. But does it have to be milk? Not necessarily. Does it have to be yogurt? Not necessarily. Those things can flex if consumers are looking for different things. But I think we want to, as much as possible, be consumer centric. Be ready for the consumers to show us what they're ready for, and then meet them where they're at. I would also say part of it is planning for variability. We don't just look at supply chains for milk. We look at, what does the supply chain look like for cheese? If we want to have a cheese product come, when is it coming in our portfolio? Is that 2 years out, 3 years out? And knowing what we know from the milk side, knowing we know from the beef side, how long it takes sometimes to establish those supply chains, we have to be making those bets now. We have to kind of be exploring and understanding what our path to viability is in each of those. So it's a combination of being willing to flex, but also doing as much homework as possible in all these different areas that are the highest likelihood to succeed, and being ready to pick that sort of thread up when we're ready for it.
Absolutely. Well, and this sounds a lot like, you've got everything from your concept through your product market fit phase to now, your entry to some initial adoption. Can you kind of describe now, since I hear the word bet, and I'm really excited about it because it shows a lot of startup and entrepreneurial spirit right there, as far as the company has grown from a startup into its known space. I would almost be as bold to say that it seems like, now tell me if this is kind of what it fits in your vision, that you're actually developing a whole new product category outside of what was originally just, it's organic, into something else. How do you see this transpiring as some of these bets play out in the way you're imagining they will?
Yeah, well, we absolutely envision a future where there's a carbon neutral food aisle or a carbon neutral section in the dairy cooler. We don't think for a minute that we're the only ones that are going to do this, and we welcome that, right? I talk a lot about the fact that we do very, very few things that are proprietary. Almost everything that we do is something that other folks can adopt in some way, shape, or form if they choose to. And so we don't want to be the only people doing carbon neutral food. That would be a failure in my perspective if more people aren't adopting this. And you see it, you had the logos up on the screen earlier of some of the folks that were mentioned in that article. And there are folks who are already doing this. One of the things that we see is an opportunity for better transparency for consumers, because one of the things that matters most to consumers is transparency. They want people to own their issues. They don't want people to dodge it. They don't want people explaining away challenges. They want transparency. And not everybody's willing to embrace that. But for the folks that are, the folks that are willing to be transparent and say, hey, here's what we're working on. Here's how we're making it better. Not that we're perfect, but here's how we're making progress against this goal to be better. That's really going to be critical. So if you have transparency, and especially if you start to have better alignment on how we talk about things like carbon footprint to consumers, they will guide it. Consumers will guide it and help make that aisle or that section in the grocery store a reality. Because again, we've talked about the stats already. Those stats aren't just for milk. Those stats are for consumers in general. So there should be more carbon neutral crackers and milk and beef and, pick your item. We get calls quite frequently from folks who say, I've got an idea. Do you want to try and make a carbon neutral version of our thing next? And And sometimes that makes sense for us to consider. Sometimes it makes sense for us to encourage them to bring that thing to market on their own because we think there's a home for it, even if it doesn't fit us at the given moment. We absolutely see a future where there is a carbon neutral section. And ideally it's probably that looks a little bit like what organic did. It becomes an organic section. And then over time, organic becomes mainstream enough that it isn't its own section anymore. It's just integrated into the dairy cooler. Generally in a lot of retailers today, you don't always see organic in a separate cooler. It's right alongside the other milk. And so you can just grab that thing, not have to go to a different spot. When it becomes mainstream enough, you'll see that. So we absolutely envision that being the future.
That's very cool. I mean, it's just kind of like, I'm thinking of a carbon neutral or maybe even negative charcuterie board. That's an amazing milestone to be like
delicious.
The whole spread is just everything here you see is carbon neutral or negative. So okay, that has to call into question. You mentioned the words transparency, so that perked my ears up into one of the dirty words of the industry, and that is not everybody takes the high road of transparency. There is the greenwashing that occurs. So I would like to hear a little bit from you on that, on how you guys are taking a position and frankly a leadership position, it seems like, in a stance on what you're going to do as that might come up, or there could be scandals, whatever. I don't need to mention company names, but some corporations do take the approach where they say, oh, we'll just put a legal team to decide for one day when they figure it out that we've been saying things that aren't quite accurate for the consumer. So how have you guys taken an approach on that now?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really critical issue. And for us, as the first carbon neutral food company in the US, it is imperative for us to make sure that we are impeccably credentialed and that we keep everything totally above board, super transparent. We take the most conservative approach to everything that we do in terms of estimates, in terms of the modeling that we do, because we want to make sure that we don't have to worry about accusations of greenwashing or something else, because there are folks that really are doing this right. So for us, we start by meticulously measuring every aspect of our carbon footprint, from the inputs into the farm, all the way through the supply chain, including driving home from the grocery store and recycling the carton. And this provides us with the bespoke LCA, a life cycle analysis of our products, from all the inputs that go into the farm all the way to that recycling of the carton. So from there, we can calculate the total footprint of our products by looking at the total volume of product and a unit basis. We can look at the total footprint we have as a company. And we know exactly how much we have to neutralize in order to get to fully carbon neutral for our business. So we set goals for ourselves every year about how much reduction we can achieve at the farm level, with the intent to get to almost 100% of that reduction coming through our work on farm with farmers. So in fact, this year we're on track to already be, with our farm projects, to generate enough emissions reduction to neutralize over 60% of our footprint by the end of this year. Just through the on-farm work that we're doing. So that is leaps and bounds ahead of the industry. And that's not some big commitment for 2030 or 2050, or we'll get there, when my grandkids are getting ready, right? So the combination of our on-farm reduction and combining that with the use of gold standard carbon offsets that are audited independently by third-party certifiers, this allows our fans to be totally confident that they are getting 100% carbon neutral products every single time they choose neutral. And it's been that way since day one. So we think these third parties are really critical to making sure consumers can have confidence, because I was literally doing an interview this morning with an outlet that's talking about the challenges of greenwashing and when marketers overreach and telling a story that isn't fully representative. And we think the answer to most of that is transparency. So we're very transparent about what we do, and making sure that we bring consumers along for the journey. Greenwashing has the ability to ruin credibility for everyone. And we need consumers to understand that there are real opportunities to make a difference here. So credibility, transparency, those are at the top of the list for us. You're right. There's some folks that will make claims that, let's say, we wouldn't be comfortable making those same claims. But we want to make sure that everything we do is transparent, is above board, and people can check us.
Absolutely. Well, it just builds more into the brand equity for the long run. And so, like I say, so roll, and as a kind of a wrap up here, before we open it up to additional questions that people might have, because you just got this wellspring of knowledge, I have to point out some of the amazing things on the product strategy side that I've heard so far. Everything from product market fit, the underserved market, working out, supplier partnerships with stakeholder management. You just touched on like different kinds of positioning that you're using with regard to the areas of trust around consumer adoption. building up that onboarding by not changing the habits, but changing the amount of information or consideration set that people have with regard to carbon neutral as an option, branching out and really what is nascent now, but may become the main thing, is going to be this whole new product category around carbon neutral. I would say you have incredibly impactful, to use your term again, product strategy you've managed to put together because of considering all these different components. So at this time, I'd really love to open it up to Dave again as well to ask any additional questions that we kind of have in back and forth.
Yeah, I think what I want to say, just great. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Brian, for a really great exchange. I learned a lot. It's obvious that climate change is not going away. It's a long-term trend. It's impacting the food industry in so many ways. But from a consumer perspective, the tensions are there. People are, they are concerned when they, a lot of people are probably concerned when they buy the regular milk, that, I understand the linkage here, and but I still want my milk, and I love this milk and other dairy products. So I think it's brilliant for what Neutral Foods is doing in bringing together this sort of product strategy. If you look at other companies and so that we've seen that are in this space, some of those what I showed earlier today, we've seen this sort of these 5 basic principles I'm showing here as being themes that, for companies. So you targeted specific moments, regular dairy consumption moments where people feel these tensions. And I think that's a brilliant, approach, and then, people are expecting products to taste and be convenient as they are, and you're not changing that. They're still getting what they normally do. It's just, like you said, go to the left, and pick up the
grab
yellow.
that curtain that looks like
Yeah, get the yellow one, so and so that is a marketing cue, that yellow, go to the left, and then that tension's going to be resolved. That is the key for success. Your brand story, every time people consume, every time people go to the left and buy, it's a reinforcement, of this brand story. And I think doing that, you're going to connect the dots and everything. The other thing I want to mention is that our research that I mentioned earlier, about these product barriers, the barriers for people that are aspirational to buy products that are more climate smart, are, either availability, they can't find products in whatever categories they're looking, but confusion. I think this marketing, we need to bring to market more marketing, more sort of, whether it's direct marketing on products or even public service announcements of the industry can bring, saying this is ways to really help define the issues and the opportunities that consumers can have to make a difference. I think that's really important. And then product performance is a barrier for, I don't think, not in your case, but for other companies, that is an issue that really needs to be addressed, because it's a barrier for a lot of people. And then affordability, and so Jim, I think appreciate you and as well as Brian, everything you mentioned. So I'm going to now move on to the Q&A part of our exchange here today. And so Brian, do you have access to those questions? Maybe you can answer them or ask them.
I'll see if I can look through that here. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can jump in and see what's available here in the Q&A. I've got a couple of things. Okay, I've got a great one here from an attendee that's asking, given the lessons that you've learned in Neutral, what are the top pieces of advice that you would share with others looking to take on more climate-friendly initiatives? And that advice, probably maybe the best way to structure that is either it's about finding information, making decisions, or collaborations with other people. Which of those pathways would you like to give advice down?
Well, I think the main thing you have to start with is the information. You have to understand what the consumer need is that you have an ability to solve uniquely. And then I think it's really incumbent on folks to figure out where is their unique way to solve that problem, So I was on a webinar earlier this week and talking with some really smart folks in their business. They're really focused on packaging, because packaging is such a big part of their footprint. They've got a lot of opportunity to do innovation there. And that's a place where they can really innovate, and they focus there. That's where their energy is going to address this issue. For us, it's really our differentiators at the farm. That's where the majority of the impact happens. And so if we can go there, that's much more impactful for us than trying to just change packaging. That doesn't mean we don't want to continue to push forward on packaging to have even better packaging options. It's something we actively work on, but packaging is on the order of 4% of our total footprint versus in these other categories, maybe it might be as high as 30 or more. So we focus on where we have a differentiation. So we know what consumers care about in terms of having a more climate friendly product. We know that we have an ability to have impact at the farm in a way that most people don't. So we focus our story there. We try to tell that story more effectively. So I'd say understanding your own business, where is your biggest area to have an impact? Because it's not the same for everybody. You know, packaging wouldn't be the most important thing for us to focus on. It is important, but it's not the most important. But for another business, it might really be the number one thing that they would look at. So understand where you can have the biggest impact and where you're differentiated in your ability to make that impact. You know, for us, you know, I talked about the fact that we're not doing something that other people can't do. Other farms can absolutely implement the kind of work that we're doing. Those companies don't always prioritize bringing the resources to the table to help enable that. They might have other priorities. They other things that are really important to them that are just different. And so understanding like how you can make a difference and then bring the resources that you can bring to make that story be different than it was before, that I think that's where I'd start.
So that brings in another question that I see here, which is asking a little bit more about the kinds of information, or at least the decisions you end up making, which would be things like, are you looking for more ahas in the initial stage, or are you more so focused on like validation of hypotheses? How are you going about, you know, deploying that particular set of insights and information?
Yeah, I'd say we definitely do both. We are certainly in some cases looking for validation because we have a reason to believe, whether that's through prior research, whether that's through retailer feedback, whether it's coming through whatever source, we want to validate and see like, is our hypothesis accurate here? But I think you also have to be really, really willing in other cases to be surprised by the answer and be willing to hear something that wasn't what you expected and may not be what you wanted. You know, so I mean, one super simple thing that I'll talk about for us is related to our packaging. You know, we've got the carton up here. This is what you'll see on the shelf today.
Yeah.
By the time you get to October, you'll see a new carton that's sitting on the shelf. And what we realized, we love this thing. We love this carton. We thought it was great for a whole bunch of different reasons. It's worked well for us, but it's also not perfect. Not because the people that worked on it weren't smart or anything else, but because we recognize after talking to consumers that sometimes cause confusion. One of the questions we get is like, is this real dairy? Because there's not a cow on the front of this. It's very common to see a cow on the front of your milk carton. There's not a cow on the front of it. Is it real dairy? Is this plant-based? Is it something else? So we recognized, you know, much to our chagrin, that we could have done a better job of that. And so we needed to address that. So when you see the new package that'll come later, you'll have an awesome, beautiful cow face there that's helping to understand that that's a real dairy product and it's not an alternative. Things like someone asked me about this earlier today, but you know, we didn't have our logo is probably too low on the carton. You know, it's some shelves like will actually block out our logo. You can't see it enough. So we have to be willing to hear things that maybe wasn't, you know, our favorite thing to hear. It would be great if people said, you've done it perfectly. Everything is exactly right as it is. Don't change a thing. But I think for any brand, that's probably pretty likely that you get it 100% right all the time. So where is the feedback that a consumer tells you something that you weren't interested in hearing or maybe weren't ready to hear? And I go like, okay, I can learn from this. How do I be better as a result? So absolutely, we look for things that validate hypotheses we have, but we also have to be willing to hear things that are different. And if the consumer gives you insight that will help you be better in your business, be better at communicating them, let's be willing to listen. So we do both.
Yeah, that's just to the point, if I can just jump in, is that these are great marketing cues. You know, your brand's a cue, image of a cow is a cue. You know, it's really important. It signals things that, you know, it informs perhaps even implicitly. You know, consumers don't even know why, but, you know, they have these impressions about your products because of these cues. Getting them right is really important.
Absolutely.
Related to that, sometimes we'll hear people say like, "Oh, it looks like an orange juice carton," and you know that's not what I want to hear. But the reality is, if it's confusing, let's make sure that we solve that confusion. And so the yellow carton has been absolutely fantastic for us. It has stopping power at the shelf. It helps people be willing to kind of break up as they're scanning that milk aisle and they see that yellow thing that looks different. Sometimes that helps us to draw attention, but we need to make sure that we're doing all the right things around that. Like just the yellow on its own isn't enough. let's make sure we have the other right cues in there to help consumers not be confused. I mean, to your
Yep.
point on the last slide you had, Dave, like those barriers to adoption, if a customer
Yep.
is confused about what you are, pretty unlikely they're going to pick it up and put it in the cart. So we have to be willing to learn and see like, oh, we can be better there. Let's be willing to be better there. And that happens on the packaging. It happens in our supply chain. It happens with our projects with farmers. So we're in a learning journey. We don't think that we have this thing figured out 100%. Anybody that thinks they do, my take would be delusional. But
Right.
we think we're doing a lot of things right, and everything we can learn to make us better, and we're appreciative for that.
Great.
So that brings another point, because I know that you're kind of wearing a couple different hats, especially as the company has moved from the startup phase into growth and that sort of thing. And you did a lot of parts in marketing. And so I got a question here that is actually asking about the commercialization. There is this drop of the baton that happens again and again for a lot of different product management and marketing teams. Product knows everything about the product, and then they forget to tell marketing all about it, and then marketing doesn't know what to promote. So how did you ensure that you had that proper handoff to commercialize? What were the extra steps or things you put in, I guess, the safety net to make sure that happened well?
I think the biggest thing is intention. The biggest thing is us knowing on the front end that those are some of the risks and trying to cut that risk off everywhere we can. We're a startup, but one of the things that is unique for us as a startup is we're a startup that's filled with industry folks who have been around the block, who know where those challenges are. And so it gives us a lot of insight to start with. We know where a lot of the potholes are going to be. So hopefully we do a better job of avoiding them. That doesn't mean we miss them all. We certainly still hit some, but if we understand where those challenges are, I think we can be more intentional about making sure that we don't have that missed handoff. The other thing is, I would say, because we're a startup, we're pretty small. There aren't that many handoff stages. We're very integrated in what we do, and we have a really specific focus on being really connected to our supply chain partners. I think a lot of startups, especially, you have an idea. You have this idea either for a product or a brand or a way to connect with consumers, and that may be really insightful. But having the ability to pair that with supply chain expertise, like our head of operations came out of the dairy industry and has been in that for most of his career. He knows dairy plants inside and out. It's easier for us not to have that missed handoff because we have an expert inside who's already done it. And not to knock folks who are maybe greener into a category. There's really great things that can sometimes come out of that, but sometimes you just don't know where those potholes are going to be. And so for us, having the expertise in-house is really important, and being very intentional, making sure that we go into every one of these to say marketing is part of the story, product is part of the story, commercialization and the operation is part of the story. They all have equal seats at that chair, or equal seats at the table, excuse me. So I'd say more than anything, it's intention. And
Yeah, I was going to say, musical chairs there, but at least get everybody to the table. So I do have a question, though, from somebody that it sounds like they might be maybe either new to the industry or they're new to product management. And so, they ask the question, so for those just starting out and looking to prepare to be able to make those quick decisions or pivots or whatever, is there perhaps a concrete way, and we only have I don't know, this is going to be a 1-minute answer here for the time, but is there a concrete way that you articulate your possible choices that you'll have to make, whether it's on paper or back of a napkin? How do you concretely basically diagram out what you're going to have to do in terms of making a choice one way or another, or preparing that pivot? How do you communicate that internally in the company with others?
Yeah, let's say for folks that are new, I would start by saying we were all new at some point, so we all had to learn. So no, there's nothing wrong with being new at it. You're just, how quick can we learn those things? I would say what we do is we lay out what are the values that are most important for us when we make decisions. So we go back every single time to a values-based driver on that decision, because there are times when there's a convenient thing or a faster thing or an easier thing that may not be as aligned with your values as you want it to be. So we understand what are the things that are right in the dead center that we will never compromise on. And then what are the things that we're not sure, maybe this will fit, maybe it won't fit. Where can we kind of understand that there might be a different kind of solution? And then understand, what's in the center, what's uncompromising, and then where can you flex? If it's, for example, we know that we're going to be carbon neutral no matter what. Packaging type, are we in a half gallon or a gallon? We can flex on that. If the consumer says we really need this to be in an 8-ounce use for packaging of lunch boxes, okay, can we accommodate that? As long as we keep our core things the same, what are we willing to kind of flex on? The other thing is understanding which of those decisions are going to ladder to future things that make your process easier. So for our product development roadmap, for example, we have about 8 items on there that say these are our guiding principles. So number 1, we will play where impact is. That is at the top of our list every single time. If this doesn't have a high intensity or a high total volume carbon, that's not a place for us to play. It's a great place maybe for somebody else, but that's not our place to play. That's first and foremost. Then we kind of go down that list of 8 things to say, are we meeting each of those criteria, yes or no? But it was really important for us to lay out on the front end what those decision criteria were so that we're not reacting in the moment. So we don't come up and say, oh, I have to make this decision in the next 3 days. What do I consider? We know ahead of time what our decision criteria are. Doesn't make the decision always easy, but knowing what your criteria are, what you will not flex on and what you are willing to kind of think about differently, that would be the key. That would be the starting point for me.
That is great strategic discipline. I have to applaud you from my time in military and business. Like, you've got it on point. So good job, Jim.
Great, I appreciate it. So just kind of to wrap here, if this is a topic that some of you that are listening in, are really interested in, and say, or you want to, develop or implement your own sort of climate smart product strategies, you can download this article that we've written, and we've used, Neutral Foods a bit as a case study in it, because I think it says a lot about, doing it right and taking approach, even though, as Jim said, you're still learning and there's need to pivot as you move along. But anyways, you can download this article. It's something that we've written, and I think it's a pretty good read. So again, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jim. Is outstanding. Thank you, Brian, for the exchange here, and thank you for everybody who's attending today. So take care. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.